Hello there and welcome to Biz1st Review 360, where we bring you a roundup of this week's top business stories and developments that impact the economy. I'm Joel Outscore. On our top story tonight, the tea industry celebrated its 150th anniversary by hosting a global Ceylon tea party across 50 countries through diplomatic missions, cafes, restaurants, homes and companies. This unique global event is aimed at setting a world record for the largest global tea party ever.
The tea industry gathered at the Golf Face Hotel at 5 p.m. on Thursday to kick off Colombo's biggest tea party to coincide with Ceylon tea anniversary celebrations around the world. The global Ceylon tea party, hosted by countries' diplomatic missions at a cost of 25 million rupees, served fine Ceylon teas and a specially created biscuit for guests.
Actually, it's an event to highlight the brand Ceylon tea. So we have officially 60 events running through our embassies, just like this, in 24 hours. So we started off in New Zealand, and we'll probably end up in the West Coast in the US. So right now, as you saw, we passed it on to Islamabad in Pakistan, and they'll pass it on to somebody else. So just like this, it's going to be a common theme. The Ceylon tea brand is going to be promoted to significant audiences, people who are in the tea trade, buyers, exporters, and that will, of course, highlight our tea in a much stronger way for our 150 celebrations.
The commercial cultivation of tea commenced in Sri Lanka in 1867, replacing coffee, which till then was the country's main cash crop, shortly thereafter devastated by a ravaging plant blight. It was pioneered by a Scotsman named James Taylor, who is reputed to have developed the first commercial plantation in the country and was responsible for initiating the first formal manufacturing process of Ceylon tea on Lul Kondara Estate, Heberhatta. Today, Sri Lanka is celebrating 150 years of Ceylon tea in the backdrop of pressing issues that have impacted production, exports and promotions. Both Minister Navin Dissanayake and the chairman of the tea board have expressed disappointment over state bureaucracy and red tape that have delayed a global Ceylon tea promotional campaign, despite charging a cess of 3 rupees and 50 cents for every kilogram of tea exported.
It's been dragging on for so long. I'm also very tired of this, as I mentioned in my speech, because the government procedures are so strict now, and even officials, they don't want to make decisions. So we have got the cabinet approval for it, and we have just floated about 2 weeks ago the media buying tender. That is that although we got the tender for the creative bit that has been done by Phoenix, the actual media placements, whether you're going to put it on CNN or Al Jazeera or whatever, that has to be decided, because that is the one that's going to really be effective. So that tender has just come out, and soon after that is finalized, we can start.
The thing is this: the promotion campaign depends on a tender process that is very slow. It has been stuck for almost 3 or 4 years now. But the thing is, I don't want to make this a tender process issue, because we need a tender process. We have to have a transparent system of fairly awarding financial awards. So let's leave the tender process aside. Let's look at other aspects. In the tea board, we've had a vacancy for the head of finance, for example, for 8 months. I can't fill that vacancy because the red tape involved in getting that filled is just so slow. I'm not pointing a finger at any particular individual, and this is not a political problem. This is an administrative problem. This is a much lower level problem. But unless we can cut through that red tape, we can't deliver the proper services we need to deliver to the industry. And that's the frustration I'm having. We export 4 billion rupees of tea every week. 4 billion. And if those exports are delayed by an extra week, can you imagine the cost of finance that those companies have to have in order to fund that delay? Delays mean money, and because of that, I want the tea industry to be as profitable as possible. People have invested in this industry to make money, give employment, make the economy work. So it's our job to make it work fast.
Sri Lanka launched a roadmap for climate reforms. Let's take a look.
Sri Lanka launched the roadmap for investment climate reforms with the aim of reaching the 70th rank in the ease of doing business index by 2020. Addressing the gathering, the country director of the World Bank said the doing business index is a key indicator of a country's growth track record.
Sri Lanka needs to assert its position firmly both in the region and internationally. The Doing Business report is one of the most cited reports of the World Bank globally. The assessment that goes into the report covers 190 countries. The difference between this report and that which a student gets from school is that the results in the Doing Business report are public. The intention is not to shame, but to encourage and review the opportunities for corrective measures. And I think we also heard Minister Malik and the Prime Minister talk about some of these reforms and how they can not only be accelerated, but actually be made to count towards the Doing Business ranking. Another difference is that not only the assessed will use the information to determine the next steps. We know for sure that investors use the results to make a decision on whether they are going to invest or not. They will be looking at the actual ranking, but more importantly, they are looking at the trend, and the trend over a number of years. They may even use the results to make a prediction of the following year's ranking.
Several new laws are in the pipeline to ensure that the reforms would be implemented.
We all know and understand that reforms are difficult and challenging, even for those who stand to gain from from their implementation. The agenda that will be tackled today underscores Sri Lanka's commitment and drive to accelerate its reform agenda. I believe that the package of reforms is sound, and overall it is going to be very beneficial. But to get better than satisfactory impact from the reform process, it will need commitment and perseverance. And I was very heartened to hear the Prime Minister say that a lot of these reforms can be accelerated, because ultimately that's what's going to count.
Welcome back to the show. This is Biz1st Review 360. The island's main business chamber, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, appointed veteran banker Rajendra Thiagaraja as its new chairman during the 178th Annual General Meeting in Colombo. We had a chat with the new chairman of the chamber on future plans.
Hello and welcome to the show. Today we have with us Mr. Rajendra Thiagaraja, the newly appointed 178th chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Now, Mr. Thiagaraja, welcome to the program, and can you tell us, in terms of attracting foreign investment, how do you do it when we live in an ambience of the bond scandal, ministers fighting amongst themselves, and inconsistency of policy? How do you attract foreigners?
I think Sri Lanka, we in Sri Lanka, having gone through 3 decades of trauma, I think today we have a unique opportunity of being optimistic. And in that process, yes, you will not have a straightforward, even path in this journey. The courage is to look at a clear vision and pursue that relentlessly, regardless of pitfalls which you find in the way. And I think from a chamber's point of view, we also endorse the current regime's view that foreign direct investment, along with export diversification, are 2 important ingredients in contributing to a robust, sustainable GDP development. And in that process, in supporting foreign investment, the fact that we now have a war behind us is the first positive thing. And beyond that now, we have to look at a few other areas, like you quite rightly said, consistency in policy, communicating that consistency to the general public, and also giving the opportunity for various stakeholder groups to engage and express diverse opinions in shaping such policy are important ingredients for any investor to look at positivism. And I must say, from the Chamber's point of view, we certainly appreciate the government's openness to listen to an alternate point of view. We also recognize that it is not always possible to get one's point of view to be accepted as the most appropriate way forward. But what we as a Chamber would continue to do is to engage consistently with the government on behalf of our membership as well as the general private sector at large as the key voice of the private sector in engaging for policy advocacy. And in doing so, we use a few avenues available to the Chamber infrastructure. Two which I would like to point out are, we have 5 national agenda committees and 8 steering committees which cover a wide spectrum of subjects which are relevant in today's context, which are used to engage a broad spectrum of membership as well as people who are non-members to contribute in each of these areas and subjects, which bring in a wealth of views which then are used and distilled for the Chamber to take a position and convey its view to the government.
So, Mr. Tyagaraja, what can the private sector do to help with foreign direct investment? Is there anything that can be done?
Yes, certainly. I think for a start, every one of us who are living, working and have made Sri Lanka our place with pride have to start to believing in Sri Lanka. That is a very important ingredient to be positive about Sri Lanka. And once you have that positivism, you continue to do your own bit, whether you are in a professional background, whether you are in a small business, whether you are in corporate Sri Lanka or whatever it is. All you can do is to use your skill set and continue to excel so that as an aggregation, the country benefits from these skills and commitment to progressively move forward in its journey to model itself as one of South Asia's role models.
Now, Mr. Tyagaraja, there appears to be a sea of uncertainty for those foreigners trying to look for opportunities in Sri Lanka. They may be directed to the BOI, they may be directed to the Agency for Development, they may be developed to the Minister in charge of International Trade, and so on and so forth.
Before I address the question as to where an investor should go, I think the message to the policymakers is to recognize that if there is this vacuum, for there to be more consistency in the communication channel on behalf of the government and policy, so that there is clarity for any prospective investor who comes in. Right? But just from a slightly different perspective for us, while we are looking at a new Sri Lanka after 30 years, let's also not forget that during those 30 years and before that, there have been investors who have come into Sri Lanka with the belief of what this country can offer and who have made good businesses in this country and have good memories. For example, the British currency maker De La Rue, which came here in the 80s, went through 30 years of conflict but still did not choose to go away. MNS as a group continuously has supported and being in Sri Lanka. So I think while recognizing some of the imperfections, those are areas for improvement. But again, what we have to see is, from an overall perspective, is Sri Lanka relatively a country which offers opportunity. and I, for one, am pretty convinced that it is so.
Mr. Tyagaraja, does Sri Lanka have enough opportunities for foreign investors?
So again, looking at the initial numbers for the first 6 months, it appears that the GDP growth we see for the first half predominantly has come or stemmed from the construction sector. And that is to be expected in a environment of resurgence after conflict. But I think from a national policy perspective, this country has advocated to have sustainability through export diversification as a key ingredient to economic growth. And I think what we now need is to reduce the dependency on construction for economic growth by further focusing on areas such as creating those 1 million jobs, which is one aspiration of the government, really focusing on financing of exports, and then thirdly, increasing the commitment and focus on fostering the small and medium sector of Sri Lanka's business, because Sri Lanka is not Thailand or India or Vietnam. It is a more modest country with 20 million people, and the real engine which we believe which can drive this economy is the SME sector. So there is much more to be done in that sphere of activity.
On the other side of this break, expert views on Sri Lanka's foreign policy, choices in a changing world. Welcome back. You're watching Biz1st Review 360. Well, changing national, regional and global developments have made it timely to review Sri Lanka's foreign policy and to present fresh perspectives on its future. Here are some highlights from Sri Lanka Foreign Policy Forum organized by Lakshman Kadirugama Institute.
The first shift in economic power from west to east has been gathering pace for some decades and accelerated since early 2000. In particular, 2001 may be seen as a watershed moment in this shift because of China's accession to World Trade Organization. In that year resulted in estimated gains of nearly 10 billion a year for Chinese economy. 16 years later, China is the world's largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity. Even in terms of nominal GDP, it is estimated to overtake the US as the world's largest economy in 2029. Meanwhile, India is predicted to overtake the US as the world's second largest economy in purchasing power parity terms in 2050. The growing economic powers of these Asian powers has also translated into more confident foreign policy initiatives. China Belt and Road Initiative is one of the most ambitious connectivity plans ever envisioned, which could result in 1 trillion of investments in over 60 countries. India is also strengthening its regional engagement, with one example being Prime Minister Modi's commitment of roughly 2 billion towards strengthening of India-ASEAN connectivity. For Sri Lanka, this shift from west to east is naturally a welcome development. Given our strategic locations at the center of the Indian Ocean, it provides an unprecedented potential economic opportunity if we carefully plan, actively and pursue it.
That the United States is likely to continue to be the predominant military power in the Indian Ocean for years and likely decades to come. We need to be very careful in overstating the so-called decline of the United States. The United States is by far the biggest military power, and barring some major change, it will continue to be so, and it will not be challenged by other major powers for many years to come. That being said, there's a far more important risk of change in relation to the United States, and that is the risk of damage to US credibility, which in fact is far more important than the number of aircraft carriers or battleships that one might have, because the power and influence of a great power rests on credibility. And one risk arises from perceptions of a reduced US credibility as a reliable ally, and which could seriously undermine its influence with its regional powers.
The gradual weakening of confidence in established norms and values, especially in the West, is apparent in Brexit and last year's presidential elections in the US and the subsequent political turbulence. While global values of political and economic freedom were unfortunately never universally applied or evenly enforced in our world, there is now even more uncertainty as to how we can ensure rule-based international order, which includes norms like freedom of navigation and overflight, free trade, democratic institutions, and equal rights for all. As a smaller state in the region with increasingly powerful players, Sri Lanka should concern about any apparent weakening of support for these values, which are necessary for Sri Lanka's long-term stability and interests. To paraphrase, the first Foreign Minister of Singapore, the Sri Lankan-born Mr. S. Rajaratnam, a smaller state needs a rule-based international order for practical self-interest and not vague idealism, so that it can ensure its long-term objectives of peace through collective security, economic and development and self-determination.
There is at least a realistic or serious possibility that the United States could become a cause of strategic instability in the region rather than an unalloyed pillar of stability. And this could particularly occur in the case of a significant deterioration in US relations with countries like China or Iran, for example. Now, my point here is this would not be good for the region, which for decades has, like it or not, enjoyed the benefits of a Pax Americana, in which the United States has paid a very large proportion of the costs of providing maritime security in this part of the world. And in my view, a reduction of US credibility and influence will be bad news not only for US allies and friends, but also even for US competitors such as China.
An international rules-based order is essential for Sri Lanka's peace and security, economic growth and democratic stability. Indeed, smaller countries like ours rely on rule-based order as far as more preferable alternative to the scenario of rule by force, a game which we cannot win and certainly not alone. It is for this reason that Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew once wrote that Singapore must remain committed to upholding the rule of law in relations between states, even if there are limits to the efficacy of international law. Sri Lanka's development as a centre of the Indian Ocean cannot afford a weakening of international rules and principles like the freedom of navigation, commitment to the law of sea and democratic values. This is why President Maithripala Sirisena signed the Lakata Concord this March and the IORA Summit, affirming the freedom of navigation, a culture of democracy and human rights. And the Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has recently spoken of the Code of Conduct for military vessels in the Indian Ocean. Our foreign policy must therefore continue to advocate and support rule-based global order.
India is a major rising power in our world and obviously very, very important for Sri Lanka. As a starting point, India's imperatives and perceptions of its role in the Indian Ocean are often quite different from those of other countries. India considers itself as a sort of the natural leading Indian Ocean state and destined to be a leader of the region. And in fact, some would argue that India sometimes takes a somewhat proprietorial attitude towards the Indian Ocean and perceives the presence of extra-regional naval powers, particularly China, as essentially illegitimate. Now, India's views on the Indian Ocean are partly defensive and a function of its colonial experience, and where it desires to see the exclusion of potentially dangerous powers from its neighbourhood. But this involves sometimes an assertion, at least unofficially, that the military presence of outside powers in India's neighbourhood is essentially illegitimate, as I said, and that neighbouring countries should exclusively rely on India as the regional security provider. Now, if this is not actually policy, which it's not formal policy, it's nevertheless a highly preferred objective.
Well, on that note, we wrap up this edition of Biz1st Review 360. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you with us this evening. And just to keep you on the know that you could keep abreast of the latest and trending stories on our Facebook page, Biz1st Review 360. And if you missed the program, don't worry, it's uploaded on our website, Newsfirst.lk YouTube webpage. Well, we'll see you again next time, same place. Good night. Take care.